So firstly, Frederik, thank you so very much for your time in doing this session. Really appreciate you talking to me and sharing your knowledge and information about yourself, Cardano Foundation, and Cardano Summit, which is taking place later this year in Dubai. Now, before we start, just wanted to check, how has your day been so far, and is there anything interesting going on in the world of Cardano right now?
Thank you very much for asking. My day has been pretty phenomenal. We just launched yesterday, I believe it was, a new Explorer from the Cardano Foundation. And when I say a new Explorer, it's the first Explorer we launched from the Cardano Foundation. And what's so unique about it is that we actually built that together with regulators, because we see that there's a higher need for regulators, auditors, and other people who are supervising blockchain to understand the incentive mechanisms and to understand different things of what's happening on a blockchain, and they're not able to read the code of all these blockchains. So they need a different view, sort of a visualization of understanding. For instance, is there a slashing mechanism? So is there a login mechanism on that blockchain? If there's a token who works on that blockchain, what's the incentives of that token, and how does the underlying infrastructure, so the public infrastructure work, but also what does that mean for that token? So probably the best example is that there's been a lot of discussion since Ethereum moved to proof of stake. What does that mean? And this is a regulatory event. And what we actually have on this new Explorer, we can send you a link for your show notes, is that we actually show the life cycle of how proof of stake and staking actually works on Cardano. And what's really important on Cardano, for instance, is that it's actually the protocol who pays out the rewards for you to participate in the security of the protocol by staking. It is not the stake pool operator. And this means a lot depending if you are in the Dubai, if you are in the European zone, or if in the US zone, depending on capital markets regulation is. But it also means a lot in terms of how much trust you need to have in the stake pool operator compared to the protocol. And another thing which is very unique about this Explorer is that we paid a lot of attention to the protocol parameters. The protocol parameters is sort of what allows us to optimize the blockchain towards an optimal, let's say, ecosystem. So what the protocol parameters really does is it allows us to showcase the process and the decision around increasing or decreasing transaction fees, or increasing the optimal amount of stake pool operators, or how the decision making is going on the blockchain. So there's a whole set of these protocol parameters, and as Cardano matures and as we mature on sort of the governance track, these becomes more and more important. But what we also see is that the regulators, but also large companies who is regulated because they're in healthcare or they're a public company and so on, they need to understand that, because they actually need to report those things in to their supervisory authorities, because they're doing what's called an outsourcing to an infrastructure they don't own, because this is a public infrastructure. So this allows you to have a really good view on these protocol parameters and when this changes happens and what sort of indicated or instigated a change in that. So we just we launched the beta version of that, and that's obviously been very interesting. And what I think on top of that, what's really potentially even more interesting for blockchain developers is that what we did is we actually built multiple components in Java. Mm-hmm. So normally on Cardano, you are sort of, Haskell is our native language, and you get really far with Rust as well. But Java is really where a lot of, normal engineers are moving around. So what we've done now is we built this product, which you can argue should a foundation build a product or not, but by having a product, a fully working product, which is, using backend components in Java on top of the blockchain, it allows us to open source this. So we were going to make all the code not just public, but put that into our GitHub repository and encourage people to fork it and to add to it and to do pull requests. It allows you to have multiple Java components on top of Cardano, which you can build a lot of things with. Everything where you basically need to get a blockchain into a database and do something magical with it, whether that's regarding rewards or whether that's regarding business surveillance or whether that's supply chain, you will now have that hopefully in a month or two as Java components. And I really hope that that's going to encourage much more developers to look into the Cardano ecosystem, because the blockchain is amazing, but this allows you more tooling.
Absolutely, it makes the life of developers so much more easier, right, rather than learning a new language. Now, one question what I wanted to ask regarding the Explorer, is that meant only for regulators or businesses, or is it open for general public as well? So let's say even a 5-year-old can go ahead and view it.
Well, we have really some very good explorers built by the community. So I think there's some of those explorers which is really made for a software engineer or made for a first-time user. So the Explorer we built here is we've been looking more at if you are a lawyer, or if you're sitting in a traditional legacy business and you're trying to understand blockchain, it's made for you. It's made for a policymaker or regulator who needs to understand an incentive. So the idea here is that we looked at a very specific persona group where we, as the foundation, have a duty to manage, and we build it for them. That doesn't mean that as a normal person you won't get a lot of joy out of it. I'm just saying that there's a lot of community explorers, which is very good as well. But what this also this has a phone number attached to it. So if you are one of those persona groups, you can actually call us for more. Now, we are already interacting with many of these regulators and many of these sort of, big four audit firms and so on. But now it gives us a way for them to verify that what we are saying is correct without them actually having to build that code themselves. And they can go in and audit that when we publish the source code. They can go in and audit that what we're saying is correct without, being software engineers themselves. So I think to answer your question shortly, yes, anybody can use this, but I think there's some community projects who's probably better for like a first-time blockchain person. But who knows?
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And you mentioned about Cardano Foundation. So for our listeners in Dubai, can you tell us the key difference, let's say, between Cardano Foundation and IOHK? What is the key difference between both of the entities?
Sure. So blockchain foundations comes in many arts and shapes. So the Cardano Foundation is a Swiss non-profit foundation. And what's very different with the Cardano Foundation compared to many other blockchain foundations, also based in Switzerland or in Dubai or in other places, is that we didn't create the blockchain. We don't control the blockchain. We don't control the monetary policy. We are a consequence of the voucher sale, which was done in Asia. And out of that, two entities was created. One was IOHK, which was tasked with the purpose of building the first generation of the blockchain, including the academic research, including the proof points and so forth. And then Imurco, which was tasked with education, commercialization, and basically bootstrapping sort of a startup, community around that. Now, the third entity who then came later after that was the Cardano Foundation. And the purpose of the Cardano Foundation was really around looking at the longevity, so looking at the long time access. And the idea about us being non-profit means also that we have a different incentive on, what does Cardano look like, where IOHK and Imurco always were intended to end as commercial vehicles. We will never end as a commercial vehicle. It's really our duty to explore the art of the possible, to interact with the regulatory landscape and lower the barriers for adoption, but also look at how do you optimize decision making for long-term success of the Cardano public infrastructure.
And Frederik, I was listening to one of your interviews, and I believe it was with Cardano Foundation or IHK, I'm not sure. And you also discussed about the audit report, which is done by the Cardano Foundation, and I believe that happened last month, right?
The what report, sorry?
The audit report for the Cardano Foundation.
So, so again, this is a little bit where there's some differences, right? So we are a Swiss foundation, and that basically means that there is an audit requirement on us. So we have what's called a financial audit on us. So we basically use an external auditor who basically goes through all our numbers. But we also have a supervisory authority. I say that a little bit in a bracket because it's not a banking supervisory authority, as we are not a bank, right? We are basically a foundation, and there's a supervisory authority, which is the Swiss Foundation Supervisory Authority, which basically looks at our deed and says, you are supposed to do this. can you verify that this is what you're doing? And if we are not doing that, we actually are personally liable, which is a very scary thing, specifically in blockchain, because there's a big difference between being CEO of, let's say, a limited liability company, and if you break the law, then, bad thing happens. But if you just, the company doesn't go as it's supposed, or your private assets, or you don't go to jail, right? And here in this case, this is quite different. So in the Swiss Foundation, if we divert from the purpose, so which is described in the deed, even though it's not, from a criminal perspective, a problem, we're actually personally liable. And this is a part of sort of protecting the direction which was given with the initiation of the foundation. And if you go in and read that deed, what it basically says is that the purpose of the Cardano Foundation is to promote third-generation blockchains, such as Cardano, in terms of enabling adoption and so forth. So it's quite specific, but it's also broad enough that in an emerging technology such as blockchain, that we have some leeway to move around a bit.
Absolutely great. And I was going through your website about Cardano Foundation, and it did actually state that the focus of the foundation is operational resilience, education, and adoption. So can you share ways how, the foundation does actually have developers? And something that you did actually mention earlier on as well about the Java thing, that is definitely going to help the developers as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think one of the epiphanies we had is that we never wanted to do something around education, because we really felt that there was somebody else in the community who should take care of that. But what we saw is that when we interacted with universities, and when we interacted with regulators, and we interacted with business owners and board members, many of them has upgraded their knowledge, and they've gone to a university and they studied blockchain, and they're asking the right questions. The problem we're seeing is that they're learning blockchain based on a version 1 or version 2 blockchain. So they are not on a third generation blockchain in terms of education, which means that for them, all the use cases are financial use cases, and there's only one type of identity, one type of transaction. For instance, you can only do a token by using a smart contract. So they don't have the concept of native assets like we have from Cardano, for instance. And secondly or thirdly, metadata, so the story of the transactions are very limited. So what you can do on a third generation blockchain, such as Cardano or Polkadot or Algorand and so on, is completely different and opens up a scope of innovation and adoption which these users are not aware of. So we basically set forward to launch an educational program, which we call the Alpha program. And now the first 2 modules are coming in the end of the year, but you can actually join the Alpha program today, which is about 7 hours, which brings you from zero blockchain knowledge to, let's say, such a deep blockchain knowledge that you actually can understand what a third generation blockchain is and why it matters. And with the first and second module, you would then also be able to do something relevant on the Cardano blockchain. And what we do is we give this away for free. So if you're a university professor, you actually get the slides and everything for free. You can just put your own logo on it and change what you want. And the same goes for other blockchains. So we have some other sort of third generation blockchains who's approached us and say, hey, can we get this material? And we're like, yes, of course. Because we do feel that the purpose is the general blockchain adoption and what that does in terms of changing society and changing social systems. The other part, what it does on the educational side, it gives the regulators the opportunity to ask the right questions and widen the scope. So it's not just about capital markets, but it's also about consumer protection, it's about supply chain, it's about ESG and a lot of other topics, which also very often is covered by regulators. So we're getting a bigger scope and a better understanding of that. The operational resilience part is very important for us because Cardano has grown exponentially. So if you look at it, we're the third largest in terms of NFT issuance. We are, there's so much happening that on certain days we have more transaction volume than on Bitcoin or on Ethereum and so on. So what's mostly important when you don't own and control the public infrastructure, so the blockchain, is that you can rely on that it works and it doesn't go down. It doesn't need to be restarted. What about disaster recovery and those things? Mm-hmm. So in the start, there was really only one entity who was looking after that. And there was then the stake pool operators, which was starting to get tools and starting to, take over that job. We are, in terms of stake pool operators, probably the most decentralized blockchain in the world. We have over 3,000 independent stake pool operators who actually operate the blockchain. So what we built is we built a set of network monitoring tools, and we also started to deploy listening nodes and relay nodes, which basically gives dashboards. And we're now deploying and starting to have a set of tools for stake pool operators that when we go into the next era of Cardano, what you can actually start thinking about is that you have multiple lenses looking at network resilience, looking at network health, and that basically enable us to ensure that you can trust the networking layer and the operational resilience of Cardano much more than you can do on other, say, similar blockchains or similar projects. But what it also allows us to do is to allows us to work more on decentralization, because it allows the stake pool operators now suddenly a way to also add value in that part of the blockchain. So it gives them a larger role to play. Plus, it makes it more operational resilient in terms of, let's say, electricity goes down in a continent, for instance, or there's a war breaking out and those kind of things, or the tree pioneering entities suddenly disappears. It gives the opportunity to really think about, what kind of tools and having multiple entities looking at that. And we actually also found a few places which we could optimize the network layer. And we actually wrote fixes for that and deployed that on the networking layer. So we basically went from being sort of, I would say, a non-technical entity to an entity who also are able to contribute on that. Plus, we then built up very close relationship with stake pool operators, and also, sharing the knowledge we have with them, but also receiving a lot of knowledge and a lot of input and work from them. And the last is adoption, as you were alluding to. And with adoption, we kind of look at it in two areas. And here, if you have a better word, let me know. But we think a lot about what's called value capture. Mm-hmm. So value capture is this idea is if you can build an app or if you can build a value proposition on top of Cardano, we think this is extremely important. However, we already in Cardano have something called Catalyst, and we have a very active community, and they are much better in calling out who should get funding than we are. So this is already decentralized, and there's a voting process where you can get bootstrapping, you can get access to developers and so on. But I do think that exploring what's possible in terms of building a fantastic operating model on top of Cardano is important. So where we focus is on the tooling. We focus on what's actually needed, so you don't have to build everything from scratch. So if IoG is focusing on the actual blockchain, you can imagine there is a set of containers and tools and standards and other things which is needed. So you don't have to do that if you're going to build a new Google Maps on top of Cardano, or a healthcare proposition, or a digital identity, or token offering. So what we've been focusing on the last year is ensuring that there is much more tooling around that. And that's why also I was so excited about the Explorer before. It's not so much the actual Explorer, it's the Java components. And it's what it allows us to do with the regulators and supervisors and others to prove that Cardano is superior in many, many regulations. And you can really verify that without being a software engineer yourself.
That is absolutely beautifully said. And what I really liked is, Frederik, you've covered the core focus, that is operational resilience, education, and adoption. But one challenging question that I'd like to ask you is that when you talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin maximalist, historically, they have very severe allergic reaction to, let's say, associations and foundations. And the reason being, these foundations over a period of time can get really strong and maybe can even have a say in the direction of the protocol. So what are your thoughts on that? And how is it that Cardano Foundation ensures that it is the community who decides the future of the protocol?
Yeah, so I actually have attracted some Bitcoin maximalists and even some Ethereum maximalists to work in the Cardano Foundation. So I've been through sort of a quite rigorously process, because you need to really be able to explain why Cardano matter. And I'm a big Bitcoin believer myself, so I sort of know where people are coming from. So I think the way to answer that question is that if you think about a tug of war, what's so powerful with Bitcoin is that the tug of war is between three, let's call it entities or groups of people. So you have the core developers, which is really leaning up over the original white paper. Then you have the miners, which is really looking and have invested an incredible amount in infrastructure. And then you have the market cap of Bitcoin, right? So the amount of people who really believe that this is a really good storage of value, and this allows you to really, secure wealth across time, but also to transact in environments where, you just don't have access to intermediaries and you can't trust the government, right? And this is amazing. This is the power of Bitcoin. And for every single day that the code is not changed and you have sort of, resistance there, the value proposition of Bitcoin goes up. And I think this is amazing. Now, if you look at a third generation blockchain like Cardano, we are very much aware that one of the biggest problems we are facing is as we learn more about the existing society and we put more effort into changing society to the better by using, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and understanding what identity looked like in Indonesia and those kind of things, there is new features required on the blockchain. But as we now have thousands of companies already relying on the blockchain, there is a process where you would need to upgrade the source code of the blockchain. And that process has a very large attack vector. The code is already so complicated. So even though you're thinking you're adding a new feature and it's been through a very diligent Q&A process, it might actually, kill another feature, or it might open up an attack vector on the Cardano blockchain. And this is a little bit a give and take. So the tug of war looks different on Cardano than it does on Bitcoin. And I think that even though we are using formal verifications, and that's also why we like Haskell so much, it's a different value proposition. And I think those two value propositions work very well hand in hand. Cardano, I think, if you look at ADA, for instance, it's never built in the same way as Bitcoin. It's not the same underlying value proposition. ADA is built to enable use cases on Cardano, so you can be anonymous, you can be a person without no identity and still participate and contribute to the network, where Bitcoin is very much built with a financial use case in mind. So I do actually think that those two things work very well hand in hand, and I do think that there's room for both, and hopefully for many more. And that's also why, for instance, at the Cardano Summit, that we will have other blockchains joining us again this year. Mm-hmm. And we are encouraging not just layer 1s, but also layer 2s to come and talk about interoperability and operational resilience and how we get much more blockchain out there, because I truly believe that with the emergence of large language models and the accessibility of that, what we actually are going to see is that your ability to verify whether something is true is diminishing over time. Because if you go into ChatGPT, for instance, and you ask a question, what you're getting the most perfect argument why this is correct. And it's really hard for you to, figure out if this is correct or not, because the argumentation is so strong. But what ChatGPT really does, and it's not against it, it's amazing, right? But what it really does is it takes, all the information on the internet. And we think about the information on the internet where there is zero cost in uploading information. Well, basically you have a lot of wrong information as well. So it's not computable information. And what the blockchain really does by always, it always costs you something to add something, and everything is computable. It allows you actually to start thinking about how do you verify some of those things. So I do think there's a very large need for multiple blockchains, but also for more multiple businesses moving towards blockchain-based data structures, while they are adopting more and more large language models and AI. So I think it's actually vital for the human race, but also for society as such, that we get much more blockchain adoption. And therefore we need to work together with maximalists, but also with layer 2s, and with also maybe in certain instances, which have been very much against actually more permissioned blockchains, to ensure that we can get much more adoption of the general principles around distributed ledger technology, verifiable proofs, cryptographic primitives, and open and permissioned blockchains.
That is very beautifully said. And in doing the adoption, I do believe that Cardano Foundation is actually having a summit in Dubai, right? So can you tell our listeners a brief information about what the Cardano Summit is? And it is taking place between the 2nd and the 4th of November. So can you tell our listeners what is the significance and the goal of the upcoming Cardano Summit in Dubai?
Yeah, so the summit of 2022, which we held in Switzerland, was to embrace the spirit of decentralization and giving attendees the opportunity to help shape the agenda and provide them with a voting system where everybody could vote and all votes would be verified on chain. So this is what we call the Cardano ballot. And now we've moved much more into the age of Voltaire, which is sort of the governance era of Cardano, where we're really looking at giving much more control and, writing a constitution on the chain and so on. The Cardano Summit 2023 will be much more around giving the community ways to influence the agenda and become summit speakers. But it's not just about Cardano. So one day is really about celebrating Cardano, our advancements, the people who's been building on it, where the second day is way more about what I just spoke about before. It's about general blockchain adoption. How do we get to a situation where Dubai has been doing an amazing job in the last couple of years, right? To really attract a lot of, technology models and so on. But what we need to get to is we need to get to a larger adoption, and we need to get to more places where we can deploy blockchain technology, whether that's Cardano or something else. It's not that relevant. I obviously would like it to be Cardano, but the Summit Day 2 is really about how do we inspire the community, the Dubai community, but also everybody who can reach Dubai as an international business hub and travel hub, right? To make new connections, to explore the cutting edge of blockchain technology. And I think what's hugely important is the physical aspect. So we're going to have about 30 summits around the world at the same time. So people come together, in cities from around the world. But Dubai is the main hub. So we're betting on having around 2,000 people there who can find funding, find teams, explore use cases, really understand whether this makes sense and doesn't make sense, and create, roadmaps of how to deploy this decentralized, open, permissionless technology to change the world going forward. And I think, Dubai is at the moment really that place to do that.
And when was the decision made to go and have it in Dubai? As a CEO of the Cardano Foundation, did you venture other places as well? Because I was listening to your interview and you did actually mention that last year when you had it in Switzerland, people from America, they traveled for the very first time out of the country only to attend the Cardano Summit, isn't it? So in terms of Dubai, what was the decision-making process that went on, and how did you convince other people as well that, let's do it in Dubai, or let's say maybe in Saudi Arabia in the near future?
So to be very honest, that was not me. I have a team around me, and the team basically came up with multiple suggestions, and then they came up with one recommendation, and the recommendation was Dubai, and I think the logic was very good. Now, what we have to be aware of is that we are still in a bear market. So some of the OGs of Cardano and some of the projects will have some issues in terms of traveling to Dubai. But that being said, we nailed it down to basically 2 locations. And then we actually worked together with Dr. Marwan Al-Saruni, which works for the Dubai government and is the head of blockchain. And then it became quite obvious that out of the 2 locations, we nailed it down to, I think it was 3 actually. Dubai was our preferred for ensuring that not only could we celebrate Cardano and what's happening on Cardano, but we could also tap into a vibrant ecosystem in Dubai of builders and business people, but also regulators, to ensure a general blockchain adoption.
And were there any challenges, or are there any current challenges in, let's say, organizing the event in Dubai? Because to be honest, in November, the weather was definitely much better. Because right now, it's ridiculously hot. So the timing of the event is definitely much better in November.
Yeah. Now, we have a lot of problems with that. I mean, I have to say, we are not an event organizer, right? So for us, it's, this is not what we do for a living. So finding sponsors, finding speakers who's not just around Cardano, but is sort of general keynote speakers, ensuring that we have the right mix between engineers, business people, venture capital people and so on. So you're not getting a skew towards, people who just want to do a hackathon in one corner, right? Or a skew towards people who just want to do a Shark Tank or something like that. But getting that sort of constellation together, that what you're going to walk into is a vibrant ecosystem where you can, you can get like years work done by just being there for 2 days. I think that is a true challenge. The other part is we don't have that many people on the ground in Dubai. So we have one employee, and then we have some very good ambassadors. So the Baran brothers has been working associated with Cardano for a long time there, but we don't have a lot of sort of people on the ground. So it's definitely harder for us than it was in Switzerland, where we have a lot of people on the ground and we know sort of, the basic infrastructure, if you may, and have a very strong network. Our network in Dubai is good, but it's not as good. And our network in the US, for instance, is a lot better than it is in Dubai. But it also gives us the opportunity to create that network in a vibrant business community as Dubai.
Absolutely beautifully said. And you also mentioned about ambassadors. And, while I was going through your website, it did actually mention about the ambassador program. So can you tell our listeners what the ambassador program is? And I believe you just mentioned that there is one ambassador from the Middle East, right?
So there's a few ambassadors from the Middle East, right?
Okay.
But we have, and this is now it gets a little bit complicated. So we have an ambassador program, which we had for many years. And what it basically allows us to do is it allows people to be at arm's length associated with Cardano. So there is a sort of an entry, there's an entry sort of barrier to become an ambassador. You need to contribute, and there's a team taking care of it, and you will get a monthly ambassador call. There are some contributions, which means that we pay for some services rendered in terms of translation or contribution and so on. So I think what it really does is allows people who's not full-time working in Cardano to be closely affiliated with Cardano, and we contribute to them, but we also get a lot of value out of their expertise from them being community members. So I think that what the program really enables is individuals to play a proactive role in driving adoption. And it's designed to foster awareness and to educate the wider community and ecosystem on how Cardano can be utilized to drive further adoption. We currently have about 50 ambassadors from 30 different countries. And so that works pretty well, and we always have sort of ideas to improve that. On the side of that, we also have people who see themselves as ambassadors and work very extremely engaged as ambassadors, if I may say that word in brackets, but they're actually not part of this program. So this is people who have, like the Baran brothers who helped us with the summit in Dubai last year, and are going to help us this year in Dubai, which has a deep knowledge about technology and a deep knowledge about Cardano, but also they don't want to participate in sort of like a geek economy and so on, right? They're business leaders, and what they basically do is they have their own business, but they also are driving and always striving to get more blockchain adoption into the general society. And we work with a set of people like that to ensure that we have access to the right level of decision makers, but also to get inspiration and to open doors and to basically deploy blockchain in the Middle East, but also in other countries.
Absolutely. And what I'm liking is, Frederik, you're stressing on adoption, and that does not necessarily have to be with Cardano. You're focusing on all blockchain. And keeping that thing in mind, at the Cardano Summit, can you share some insights on some themes and topics that the attendees can look forward to?
Yeah, but there's so much happening there. So I guess it will be a little bit colored based on what we spoke about today. But one thing I'm very excited about is metadata. So there's going to be a track around metadata and how metadata is different on Cardano and some of the third generation blockchain, and what that means for optimizing existing business models and new digital business models such as Web3. And I think metadata is the key for all businesses today. Is that what is the oil who drives businesses today? And there's a big shift in how data is being managed, stored, and utilized as we move towards more open data footprint and less closed data footprints, but also as we move towards, like open banking and all those kind of things. So I think the metadata and how metadata can be deployed on Cardano is one of the tracks I'm very, very much looking forward to. The other part is sort of thought leaders. There's going to be some really interesting thought leaders. One I would like to maybe also mention is Dr. Maran Al-Saruni, who's the CEO of the Dubai Blockchain Center. He will be there as well, but also the co-founder of IOTA, Dominic Sina, and others. So I think there's going to be a very interesting sort of debate around, if I may say, open source, public source, centralized systems capturing business value, because very often when you have a business model, you're trying to protect that. And if data is the key to your model, you're sort of skeptical around blockchain and, how much transparency does it give. But on the other hand, the consumers and the ability to drive platform economics in the new era really relies on these kind of new business models. So I think some of those discussions around that is going to be extremely interesting. Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to say, even Charles Hoskinson is going to be at the summit as well, right?
Yeah, of course. Of course, Charles is going to have a large keynote, and he's going to be on the ground. And obviously, for those people who hasn't been engaging with Charles before, it's always an inspiration because he covers a very wide field, not just in blockchain and crypto, but he spans a lot wider across all the technologies, which means that it's very interesting to get his view on business models and new technologies and how they shape the business landscape.
Absolutely. I remember meeting him in 2015 or 16. He did come to Dubai. And at that point of time, we just met at a coffee shop. And at that point of time, the topic was more about cryptocurrency exchanges and not about NFTs or DeFi and all those things. Now, NFTs has definitely taken the world by storm. But what I wanted to find out is, let's say for the attendees, is there a possibility to get an NFT, let's say like a proof of attendance NFT?
Yeah. We had that last year as well, and there will be something like this year as well. There's actually probably going to be multiple NFTs, and last year we even had a lot of sort of like an NFT, so sort of treasure hunt as well, where you could sort of go to different parts, so the virtual part, the physical part, and you could collect a collection, and there was local collections as well. So yeah, that's going to be definitely around that as well, also to encourage people who don't normally interact with NFTs to sort of get some exposure. But what I find even more interesting is some of the use cases like we did with Veritree, so the reforestation project in Kenya, where we use this combination of dynamic metadata and static metadata. Because what the NFT really does in the non-fungible token aspect is allows you to log in an identity and log in some data, which really becomes non-fungible. But when you then start thinking about Internet of Things and sensors and other things, what you want to do is you want to, use oracles, if I may, in the old blockchain language, right, to update the information in the NFT, which means you now suddenly have this combination which really Cardano is ideal for, of using on-chain, off-chain data, but you can put a lot more on-chain, including the variable aspect. So as the tree grows, the carbon footprint is different, right? Which means the carbon value of the carbon credit is different, right? In this case, right? And you can then verify that with a set of different sensors, which is uploading on different date points, right? So weekly, monthly, and so on. And I think, exploring how the NFTs can, be used even more dynamic is very important, including for identity and other things.
Yes, absolutely. Digital identity is absolutely critical. And towards the later part, I do have one question regarding digital identity. Now, before that, I wanted to ask Frederik is that partnership does play a very crucial role at such events. Now, can you share any insights and collaborations that have been established in preparation for Cardano Summit? Are there any new partnership that has been done which is not known to the public yet?
No, I cannot share that at the moment. Unfortunately, I would love to do that, but at the moment, some of them also has told me that they would like to announce with a bang and so on. So they have their own launch schedule. But there is some partnerships which will be announced, and there is some things happening. What's very important for me, specifically because I'm coming from investment banking, and some people say, "Oh, that actually makes you really bad in blockchain and crypto," right? But for me, a lot of things is about verifiability. So I really try to ensure that what we do with the Cardano Foundation, that as much as possible needs to be verified on the blockchain. Yes. That's also why I'm very excited about our Explorer, not because it's a product and it shouldn't compete with community projects, but what is very important for me is, and when you look at, does the foundation make sense and do they live up to their promise? You should be able to find an impact on chain based through a Explorer, and that can be a community one or our own, doesn't really matter. So you need to be able, you should be able to verify some of our work, and that includes partnerships. So for me, these, you see a lot is these MOUs or proof of concept. So, like a large Fortune 500 company suddenly goes on blockchain A and is a paid partnership. So the blockchain paid, 50 million to do something, and they do something in an innovation lab, and you see maybe one transaction and then it never gets anywhere.
Correct.
For me, that's a joke. I mean, it's not against it, but I just haven't seen significant innovation and significant changes of business models happening. So for me, what's really important around those things is, you need to be able to track a change of the business model or see a significant usage of the blockchain. And as we move towards side chains and mithril and other things, that of course becomes more difficult. But I think, as you saw, for instance, I don't know if you saw, we launched together with the World Lacrosse Championship, a really interesting use case, where we have now over 6,000 NFTs. So every single jersey and jumper jacket and so on is actually on the Cardano blockchain. You can go in and find the asset on an Explorer, including a small video of the t-shirt and so on. And every t-shirt has an NFC in it. So it's like a radio beacon in it, which also allows you to have a different client experience. So it's not only verifying that this is an original product, so like these holographic things we're doing before, right? But it also allows you, for instance, to walk into the VIP section, because they now say, okay, if you're wearing that, this is unique, it's verifiable on the blockchain, and this radio beacon then allows you into maybe the VIP session and stuff like that.
Special access,
Yeah. So I think what that really does is allows you to do multiple things, and it shows you how to also create not just a virtual, so metaverse experience that you can maybe wear your official lacrosse jacket in a computer game, right? But it also allows you to have a physical different experience, which I think is something many brands are looking for today. That you can, in terms of loyalty programs, in terms of lounges, in terms of different things, that you can really give a physical experience which is dramatically different than what you get today. So it gives more utility to the good than what you were able to do just with the good itself, if that makes sense. And we can send you a link if you want to, so you can show some of those NFTs and how that connects to the radio beacon. You can even now go back to, I believe it's on our developer portal, and see some of the connection. And what's even more interesting, that little thing which we built there is actually built on Python. And as you probably know, Python is sort of another one of those programming languages which is very much in enterprises. So I think that there is some Python components there is again something which is good for adoption.
Absolutely. And one question what I wanted to ask Frederik is, and this is something you did touch base upon earlier on as well, and this is to do with maximalism. Now, Ethereum maximalists, they do not necessarily like, let's say, Cardano, and there is an office in Dubai called as Consensus. They tackles the code for Ethereum. So what message do you have for those people, and why should they attend the Cardano Summit?
Well, so I was actually just on the panel with Consensus at the 0.0 forum, where we're debating sort of the environmental impact of blockchain technology and so on. And they actually just, they came over to me afterwards and said, let's work much closer together, because obviously you now have two sort of, I mean, I'm not very deep into the Ethereum ecosystem, but you have sort of the old Ethereum ecosystem on proof of work, which in many ways are the maximalists, right? And you have the new one on proof of stake, which also has some maximalists to it, right? But the proof of stake one actually is very similar in many aspects to Cardano. And I think what that basically does is, even though the Cardano is significantly smaller in terms of footprint and adoption, but we also have a very dedicated community, and we actually have some use cases which has not been explored on the new version of Ethereum after Casper. So I do think there is some learnings to be had for an Ethereum maximalist in terms of certain things which can now be done on Ethereum as well, which couldn't be done before. And on the other side, definitely the Cardano community is very interested in interoperability. And we never believed that there would be one blockchain ruling them all. I mean, the world is too complicated, and there's too many use cases which has the benefit or could use the benefit of blockchain. So I think my big sort of, cry out will be, if we are working together, we will create more impact on blockchain than if we are fighting. And I think, when we look, at the current, who takes decisions now on who is building, we've gone a long way since the spaceship here in Zug. So it's a new generation of people. So let's just work more together, and let's ensure that we can create a better world and more impact using decentralized permissionless blockchain technology.
That is very well said, especially in the blockchain world. You often have things called as the Ethereum killer. So, you had EOS at one point of time, it was an Ethereum killer. You had Solana, which made a lot of hype. But to be honest, Cardano has definitely stood the stand of time. And right now it is at number third blockchain protocol that deals with smart contract. Now, do you envision, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, or maybe even less, that it does actually overtake Binance BNB in the near future?
So I don't have a crystal ball, right? But I do hope, and I do have some concerns around if you go in on some of those web pages who's tracking market cap. Yeah. What you're looking at there is some of that is not blockchain technology. I mean, some of that is really just, a representation of a token on something I would be very scared of even putting in the same box as what I call blockchain. Does that mean that it doesn't have value? No, it does not mean that it doesn't have value, but we have to be very careful about when we think about decentralization and the power of swarm thinking and the power of equitable growth and allowing 2 or 3 billion people who don't have access to the systems of the world, and compare those two things with what you see on that list. So what I do hope is that, that the real public infrastructure projects is going to have a lot more growth as we work towards enabling more use cases, more education, lower the barrier of adoption, but also ensuring that, that people can get access to these systems around the world. And so I think it's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be a marathon. But honestly speaking, I don't think you've seen anything yet coming out of blockchain. It was, overrated in the start because it has so much potential, and many technologies are like that. And where we are right now on the Gartner curve is basically we are now coming from a low point and we are gradually moving up. And yes, that's not as exciting as double-digit growth and all those things. But when you start looking at those use cases and you start looking at the people and the companies and the countries, nation states who's deploying open public permissionless blockchains, this is very exciting.
Absolutely. And lately, Frederik, artificial intelligence has definitely kicked the world by storm, especially with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. And one news that was circulating about UK is that HANA Technology, they've actually hired a CEO as an artificial intelligence program. So do you think artificial intelligence in the next coming years will actually steal some limelight and even investments, let's say, from blockchain industry? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. And for good reason, right? Because it's the way, with the large language models, what you got a way for a normal individual who has no computing skills or no data skills to interact with the AI and get value like this. The blockchain doesn't work like that. The blockchain is a back-end infrastructure much more, and you don't get direct value out of it like that. Blockchain will be sort of like the air you breathe. If there's plenty of air, you don't really pay attention to it, and you go around, building your business, taking care of your family and your local community and so on. But as soon as the air gets polluted or there is no more air, when you're diving, for instance, right? The whole priority changes. And what blockchain can do is AI can't do is that blockchain can be a part of securing that public infrastructure and ensuring that we don't go astray in where we are going, right? Which AI can't do. But AI will definitely, enable blockchain and be actually one of the drivers of blockchain infrastructure in the future. So I think actually it's going to, on the short term, it's going to steal some investment, it's going to steal some of the limelight, but on the longer term, it's going to enable much more blockchain businesses and much more growth. So I'm very excited about it. And you also can see there's some very large projects merging AI, computable infrastructure on blockchain. I'd like to highlight, for instance, Stephen Wolfram and Wolfram Alpha, which is already integrated into Cardano and so on that side.
That's absolutely spot on. And one personal question what I wanted to ask is, since the last few months, WorldCoin by Sam Altman and OpenAI has definitely taken the world by storm. And when you come to Dubai, they have a physical device called as Orb, which is quite nearby from the Cardano Summit. So would you be willing to go ahead and do the verification in that physical device? Because what they are claiming is that physical device will do your verification, is going to be 100% decentralized or distributed, how I like to call it. And they are using zero knowledge proof as well. So the program is live in Dubai.
Okay. So I don't know enough about it. I am a little bit protective about my identity.
Exactly.
So everywhere where I need to lead a biometric footprint or something like that, I want to understand better, because I've seen firsthand from being in the military and being associated with tier 1 and tier 2 operators, what this could lead to, both in terms of positive and negative.
Yeah.
So I would need to understand more, but I'm definitely very curious about those things, and I'm always sort of interested in trying things to understand it instead of just reading about it.
That's absolutely great. And I just have 2 questions. And the next question that I have, Frederik, is actually written by ChatGPT. So I'm just going to read out verbatim, because what I did was I put all your questions into ChatGPT and GPT-4, and I asked it to create a question. So the question is, if you were to paint a picture of the future where blockchain technology, like Cardano for instance, has transformed the world, what would be the most exciting and unexpected way you see it impacting our daily lives?
I think the most unexpected part you will see is that we would have much more time to go back to the basics. When I say go back to the basics, I'm going all the way back to the Greek. So when you looked at the Greek educational system in the old ages, right, they were spending a lot of time on first principles. So articulation of arguments, debate, philosophy, and those kind of things. And I think we will probably have an opportunity to revisit that. And I think some of those philosophical questions will become much more important, but it also will be the fundament to how we evaluate technology and how we evaluate what is the truth going forward. So I think it's going to be a change in the whole educational system and in the way we interact and trust with institutions, which also would mean that there's going to be a change in the leadership of institutions and of countries and nation states. And that change is going to challenge democracy, probably to the better, across the world, because we will need a different type of leaders to navigate a society where the most important part is not trust intermediation, but the most important part is how we, collaborate and save the planet, but also how we, work around human species and how we work around continuous growth and evolution of the human species.
That's excellent. And now some of the presidential candidates, they're also talking about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology as well. It's beautifully said. And the final question, Frederik, is, when you come to Dubai, are you planning to do something interesting, let's say like skydiving or deep diving pool or anything interesting that you plan, not related to cryptocurrency or blockchain protocols as such?
Oh, that's a interesting question. So I am a licensed skydiver, and I'm also a licensed scuba diver. I haven't really thought about doing any of those while I'm there, but thank you for the idea. Yeah. I think one thing I would really like to try is I was in Dubai, was it last year and something like that, and I actually just managed to scoop away into one of the big water parks. And there was a big line on one of the water slides, so I didn't manage to do that. I only had like 40 minutes to really run in there and have a laugh with a couple of colleagues. But there's definitely one of these very, very steep water slides, which I could imagine would work. I am probably not going to be able to do too much of sort of, private time there. So that would be something. And the other part is I'm definitely looking forward to catching up with some of the local people on the ground for dinner or something like that, to really also discuss the development of the whole region. I'm very curious also about, the geopolitical situation and how Dubai has been navigating that and the Emirates have been navigating that. So catching up with some old friends and so on would definitely also be on the agenda. But if you have any good ideas, like you just had, do send it my way. I'll be very open to try something new.
Definitely. Thank you so very much, Frederik, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it. Any last words do you have for our listeners about the Cardano Summit?
No, I think I spoke a lot about the Cardano Summit, right? So, and there's a lot of blockchain events in Dubai, and I think it must be really hard to figure out which event you go to. I am biased, of course, because I work for Cardano and I'm part of the organizers, but I've been to a lot of blockchain, fintech, crypto events in the last sort of 7, 8, 9 years, right? And if this is going to be anywhere close to what I experienced in Lausanne last year from the Cardano Foundation, I would really say, trust me, this is an event you do not want to miss. You might not get the most sort of ballroom activity, but what you're going to get is you'll really get a crash course in blockchain adoption, why it matters, together with the best people from around the whole world in 2 days. So if you just want to be in one event where it's not just about selling, but it's really about how you change the world to the better and how you deploy this beautiful technology across variable different use cases, I think this is the event you need to be to. So I would really highly encourage you to secure the tickets, get there, and who knows, you might build a business while you're there, or you might change your view on proof of stake or EUTXO or another of those things you might be thinking about why that matters.
That's beautifully said. And what I'll do is, all the details that you mentioned, I'll go ahead and mention that in the show notes as well, and I'll go ahead and mention the Explorer and quite a lot of other things as well. Thank you so very much, Frederik, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for pushing blockchain in general around Dubai. That's amazing. Thank you for your contribution.